The first gunshot rang out just as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky a deep crimson that matched the splatter of blood across the dusty main street of Rivercross, Arizona Territory, 1881. Tessa Turner ducked behind a water barrel, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had been on her way to her small room above the general store when the gunfight erupted, another senseless brawl between drunken cowboys outside the Rusty Nail Saloon. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she contemplated making a dash for safety, but the bullets continued to fly. "Miss, you best stay put," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows of the alleyway behind her. Tessa startled, nearly knocking over the barrel. A tall figure emerged, hat pulled low over his eyes, but she recognized him immediately as Jack Anderson, a cattle driver who'd arrived in town just 2 weeks prior. He wasn't like the other rowdy cowboys who passed through Rivercross. There was something steady about him, something quiet. "I was just trying to get home," she said, her voice barely audible over another round of gunshots. "Let me help you. Stay low." Jack crouched beside her, his weathered hand on her back, guiding her deeper into the alley. Tessa kept her face turned away, grateful for the dim light. The last thing she needed was for this kind stranger to notice the swelling around her eye, still tender from Vernon Miller's backhand the previous night when she'd refused his advances at the saloon where she worked as a singer. They waited in silence until the gunfire ceased, and the sheriff's booming voice commanded order. Jack stood, offering Tessa his hand. "I can see you home now, madam," he said. Tessa hesitated, then took his calloused palm. As she rose, a shaft of lamplight from a nearby window fell across her face. She quickly turned away, but not before Jack saw it, the dark bruise blooming around her right eye, poorly concealed by a dusting of face powder. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he simply adjusted his stance to block her from the view of the curious onlookers now emerging onto the street. "It's just up there," she said, pointing to the wooden staircase on the side of Miller's general store. The irony wasn't lost on her, living above the establishment owned by her abuser's brother. Jack nodded, walking beside her with measured steps. "I heard you singing at the Rusty Nail last night. You have a beautiful voice, Miss Turner." Tessa was surprised he knew her name. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." "Jack?" he corrected gently. "Just Jack." They reached the bottom of the stairs, and Tessa turned to bid him good night, expecting him to leave. Instead, he took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. "Miss Turner, I won't ask who did that to your eye," he said, his voice low. "But I want you to know, if you ever need help, I'll be around." Something in his unwavering gaze made Tessa believe him. She hadn't realized how long she'd been waiting for someone to notice not the bruise itself, but the pain behind it. And here was this man, this stranger really, offering her a lifeline without demanding her story in return. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered. He tipped his hat and stepped back, watching as she climbed the stairs to her room. Only when she had closed and locked the door behind her did she hear his boots on the boardwalk moving away into the night. Tessa pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she sat on the floor. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to weep, not from pain or fear, but from the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had truly seen her, and offered help without conditions. The next morning, Jack was waiting outside the general store when Tessa emerged for her daily errands. He sat on a bench, whittling a small piece of wood with a pocket knife, his hat tilted against the early sun. "Morning, Miss Turner," he said, rising to his feet as she approached. "Mr. Anderson," she replied, surprised. "You didn't need to wait for me. I thought you might appreciate some company on your errands." He tucked the knife and half-finished carving into his pocket. "That is, if you don't mind." Tessa hesitated. Vernon had made it clear he considered her his property, though she'd never given him any encouragement. Being seen with another man could provoke his temper further. As if reading her thoughts, Jack added, No one should bother you while I'm around. Something about his quiet confidence convinced her. I'd be grateful for your company. They walked side by side through town, stopping at the baker's for bread, the butcher's for a small cut of meat, and the dressmaker's where Tessa picked up mending work to supplement her singing income. Jack carried her packages without comment, tipping his hat to townspeople they passed. "You're not from around here," Tessa observed as they walked. Jack shook his head. "Texas originally. Been moving cattle up and down the territories for about 8 years now. Will you be staying in River Cross long?" "That depends," he said thoughtfully. "My trail boss gave us 2 weeks before the next drive. After that," he shrugged, "the trail goes where it goes." They passed the Rusty Nail, and Tessa instinctively quickened her pace. Jack matched her steps without question. "I sing there 5 nights a week," she explained, feeling she owed him that much, "but not until sundown." "I know," Jack said. "I've heard you 3 nights running." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "You have?" He nodded. "That song about the prairie flowers. Never heard it before you sang it." "My mother taught me that one," she said softly. "She sang in saloons too, back in Missouri before the fever took her." "I'm sorry," Jack said simply. They had reached the general store again. Tessa took her packages from Jack's arms, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you for walking with me," she said. "My pleasure, Miss Turner." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be improper to ask if I might escort you to your singing job tonight, for safety's sake?" Tessa's heart fluttered. "I'd like that very much." Jack tipped his hat. "I'll be here at 7 then." True to his word, Jack appeared promptly at 7 o'clock, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his worn leather vest. He offered Tessa his arm, which she took after only a moment's hesitation. The bruise around her eye had darkened, but she'd done her best to cover it with powder. Jack's gaze lingered on it briefly, his expression unreadable, but he made no comment. The saloon was already busy when they arrived, cowboys and miners spending their wages on whiskey and cards. Vernon Miller stood behind the bar, his sleeves rolled up, pouring drinks. His eyes narrowed when he saw Tessa enter with Jack. "You're late," Vernon called out, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "I'm right on time, Mr. Miller," Tessa replied evenly, moving toward the small platform that served as a stage. Jack found a seat near the back wall, his eyes never leaving her. His presence gave Tessa courage she hadn't felt in months, and when she began to sing, her voice rang out clearer and stronger than before. Between songs, she noticed Vernon watching her with mounting anger, especially when patrons complimented her performance. When she finished her set and moved to collect her meager earnings, Vernon grabbed her wrist. "Who's the cowboy?" he demanded, his fingers digging into her skin. "Just a friend," she answered, trying to pull away. "You don't have friends, Tessa," Vernon hissed. "You have me, and that's all you need." "Is there a problem?" Jack's voice, quiet but firm, came from behind them. Vernon released Tessa's wrist, turning to face the taller man. "This is none of your business, cowboy. The lady works for me." "I believe Miss Turner has finished her work for the evening," Jack said, "and she's promised to let me see her home." The men stared at each other, the tension palpable. Tessa feared Vernon would reach for the gun he kept under the bar, but after a long moment, he stepped back. "Fine," Vernon said coldly, "but remember who signs your pay, girl." Jack placed a protective hand at the small of Tessa's back, guiding her through the crowded saloon and out into the night air. Once outside, she let out a shaky breath. "He's going to make me pay for that tomorrow," she murmured. Jack's expression darkened. "You don't have to go back there." "I need the money," Tessa said simply. "There aren't many jobs for women in River Cross." They walked in silence until they reached her stairs. Jack paused, looking up at her small room. "This isn't right," he said finally. "You shouldn't have to live in fear." Tessa's throat tightened. "It's just how things are," Jack shook his head. "No, it's not everywhere." He took her hand gently. "I won't ask what happened to your eye, Tessa. but I want you to know that not all men solve problems with their fists." His sincere words brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for walking me home, Jack." He nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly. "I'll see you tomorrow?" "I'd like that," she whispered. As the days passed, Jack became Tessa's constant companion. He escorted her on errands, walked her to and from the saloon each night, and sometimes they simply sat together on the bench outside the general store, talking of small things while he whittled. She learned he had a younger sister back in Texas, that he could read and write better than most cowboys, and that he dreamed of having his own ranch someday. For his part, Jack discovered Tessa had taught herself to play the piano at a church in Missouri, that she could recite passages from Shakespeare, having found a tattered copy in a boarding house years ago, and that despite everything, she still believed in goodness. Vernon watched their growing friendship with increasing rage, but something about Jack's quiet strength kept him at bay. Other townspeople noticed too. Mrs. Peterson at the dressmaker's shop gave Tessa knowing smiles, and the baker started saving an extra sweet roll for "that nice cowboy of yours." A week after they'd met, Jack invited Tessa for a picnic on Sunday, his only full day off from the cattle pens. "There's a nice spot by the creek about a mile out of town," he said. "My horse could carry us both." Tessa hesitated. She'd never left town with a man before. "Is it proper?" Jack smiled. "We'll be in full view of the road. Your reputation is safe with me, Miss Turner." She agreed. And Sunday morning found her wearing her best dress, a faded blue cotton with lace at the collar that had once belonged to her mother. Jack waited with his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty. He lifted her easily into the saddle before mounting behind her. The closeness of him, his chest warm against her back as they rode, sent flutters through Tessa's stomach. They found the spot Jack had mentioned, a grassy area beneath cottonwood trees, with the creek bubbling nearby. Jack spread a blanket and unpacked a basket he'd arranged with the hotel cook-fried chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a bottle of lemonade. "This is wonderful," Tessa said, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. They ate and talked, and when Jack suggested they dip their feet in the creek, Tessa laughed and agreed. She removed her shoes and stockings, lifting her skirt just enough to wade ankle-deep into the cool water. Jack rolled up his pants and joined her, their laughter echoing across the water when he slipped on a mossy rock. Later, as they sat side by side on the blanket, Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out the carved piece of wood he'd been working on all week. "I made this for you," he said, placing it in her palm. It was a small, delicately carved rose, the petals so fine they might have been real. "It's beautiful," Tessa whispered, running her finger over the smooth wood. "My pa taught me," Jack said. "Said a man should be able to create beauty, not just destroy it." Tessa looked up at him, tears pricking her eyes. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Jack agreed. "Died defending our homestead from raiders when I was 16. "I'm sorry," she said, instinctively reaching for his hand. He entwined his fingers with hers. "Tessa," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart raced. "Yes?" "The cattle drive moves on in 3 days." He squeezed her hand. "I've been thinking about staying behind, but you can't," Tessa finished for him. "It's your livelihood." Jack nodded, his expression pained. "I could come back after we deliver the herd to Kansas. It would be 2, maybe 3 months. Tessa's chest tightened. 3 months seemed an eternity, especially with Vernon's anger growing daily. Just yesterday he'd cornered her after her performance, threatening to fire her if she continued seeing that saddle tramp. "I'll wait," she promised, though her voice trembled. Jack's eyes searched hers. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, and Tessa felt something within her bloom, like a flower long kept in shadow, suddenly finding the sun. When they parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I've never met anyone like you, Tessa Turner. On the ride back to town, Tessa leaned against Jack's chest, treasuring the feeling of safety in his arms. She hadn't felt that way since her mother died, leaving her alone in the world at 17. Now, 3 years later, she dared to hope for something more than mere survival. The next 2 days passed too quickly. Jack continued to escort Tessa everywhere, seemingly unconcerned by the hostile glares from Vernon and his brother, the general store owner. On his final night in Rivercross, Jack sat in the saloon as always, watching Tessa sing. Her final song was the Prairie Flower Ballad, and she sang it directly to him, pouring all her newfound feelings into the melody. When she finished, the saloon erupted in applause. Even Vernon couldn't deny her success that night, grudgingly handing over her pay without comment. Jack waited at his usual table, his expression a mixture of pride and sadness. "You were magnificent," he said as she approached. "Walk me home?" she asked, though it was their established routine. Outside, the night air was cool, stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky. They walked slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. "I leave at dawn," Jack said finally as they reached her stairs. Tessa nodded, fighting tears. "I know. I've been thinking," he continued, taking both her hands in his, "about what happens when I return." "Yes?" "I've saved most of my wages these past years. It's not much, but it's enough to put a down payment on a small spread." His eyes held hers steadily. "I'd like you to consider coming with me, Tessa. I'm asking you to marry me." Tessa's breath caught. "Jack, you don't have to answer now," he rushed on. "I know it's sudden, but these past 10 days have been the best of my life. I know what I feel for you is real, and I hope you might feel something for me too." "Yes," Tessa whispered, her voice gaining strength as she continued. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jack Anderson." His face broke into a wide smile, and he lifted her off her feet in a joyful embrace. When he set her down, his expression turned serious. "I promise you, Tessa, no one will ever hurt you again." She touched his cheek. "I believe you." Their goodbye kiss was bittersweet, filled with promise, yet tinged with the pain of impending separation. Jack pressed the carved rose into her hand once more. "Keep this close," he said, "and remember, I'm coming back for you." Tessa watched from her window at dawn as the cattle drive departed, Jack's tall figure visible among the cowboys, until they disappeared into the distance. She clutched the wooden rose to her chest, already counting the days until his return. Life in Rivercross became increasingly difficult after Jack's departure. Vernon, no longer intimidated by Jack's presence, grew bolder in his harassment. He cut Tessa's pay without explanation, assigned her later hours, and made increasingly aggressive advances. 2 weeks after Jack left, Vernon cornered Tessa after her performance, alcohol heavy on his breath. "You think your Cowboy's coming back for you?" he sneered. "Men like that don't settle down, especially not with saloon girls." "Please let me pass, Mr. Miller," Tessa said firmly, though her heart raced with fear. Vernon grabbed her arm. "You belong to this town to me. It's time you accepted that." "I don't belong to anyone," Tessa replied, trying to pull away. Vernon's face darkened. He raised his hand, and Tessa braced herself for the blow, but it never came. Sheriff Davis had entered the saloon and spotted the confrontation. "Everything all right here, Miss Turner?" the lawman asked. Vernon released her immediately. "Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff." Tessa seized the opportunity to escape, hurrying out into the night. Instead of heading to her room, she went to the sheriff's office the next morning, reporting Vernon's behavior. Sheriff Davis listened sympathetically but offered little hope. "I'll have a word with him, Miss Turner, but without witnesses." He shrugged. "Best I can suggest is you find other employment." The problem, as Tessa well knew, was that other employment was scarce for a woman alone. Still, she began looking, inquiring at the hotel, the laundry, even asking Mrs. Peterson if she needed help in the dress shop. Everyone expressed sympathy but had no positions available. A month after Jack's departure, Vernon fired Tessa when she refused to join him for a private dinner in his rooms above the saloon. That same day, Mr. Miller informed her she had 1 week to vacate her room above the general store. Desperation mounting, Tessa sold her few possessions, keeping only her mother's Bible, a photograph, and the wooden rose Jack had carved. She found a room at the boarding house on the edge of town, paying 2 weeks in advance with nearly the last of her savings. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly boarding house proprietor, took pity on Tessa and hired her to help with cooking and cleaning in exchange for reduced rent. The work was exhausting, but Tessa was grateful to be away from Vernon's threatening presence. 6 weeks into Jack's absence, disaster struck. Mrs. Johnson fell ill with pneumonia, and within days she passed away. Her son arrived from Tucson to settle her affairs, immediately announcing he would sell the boarding house. All tenants were given 3 days to vacate. Tessa, now virtually penniless, faced homelessness. In desperation, she approached the church, where Reverend Wilson offered her temporary shelter in the small back room in exchange for cleaning and playing the piano for Sunday services. It was there that Vernon found her one evening, having tracked her movements through town. He burst into the church as she was polishing the pews, his face flushed with drink and anger. "Hiding in the Lord's house?" he mocked, "playing the virtuous woman while you wait for your cowboy." He advanced on her. "He's not coming back, Tessa. Men like that never do." Tessa backed away, clutching a hymnal to her chest like a shield. "Please leave, Mr. Miller. This is a place of worship." "Reverend's gone to visit the widow Harper," Vernon said with a cruel smile. "It's just you and me." Fear coursed through Tessa, but something else rose alongside it. Anger. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Vernon lunged forward, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. "You should be." What happened next occurred so quickly that Tessa barely had time to register it. The church door burst open, and a familiar figure strode in. Jack, dusty from the trail, his face hard with fury, crossed the space in 3 long strides and pulled Vernon away from her with such force that the man stumbled backward into a pew. "Touch her again and it'll be the last thing you do," Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. Vernon recovered his balance, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. "This isn't your business, cowboy." "Tessa is my business," Jack replied evenly. "My fiancée is very much my business." Vernon's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You're lying. No man marries a saloon singer." "I would be honored to marry Miss Turner," Jack said, "and I didn't ride 300 miles ahead of my crew to argue with a coward who hits women." Vernon drew his gun, but Jack was faster. A single shot echoed through the sacred space, and Vernon fell, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. "You shot me," he gasped. "Be thankful I aimed for your shoulder," Jack said coldly. "Next time, I won't be so merciful." The commotion brought townspeople running, Sheriff Davis among them. Vernon, still bleeding and now surrounded by witnesses, claimed Jack had attacked him unprovoked. But Mrs. Peterson, who had been arranging flowers near the church windows and seen everything, stepped forward with the truth. "Vernon Miller has been harassing Miss Turner for months," she declared firmly. "Mr. Anderson acted in her defense, and he showed remarkable restraint given the circumstances." Other women from town, emboldened by Mrs. Peterson's courage, began to speak up about Vernon's pattern of behavior toward female employees and customers. The sheriff, faced with multiple credible witnesses, had no choice but to arrest Vernon, not Jack. As Vernon was led away to have his wound treated before being locked up, Jack turned to Tessa, his expression softening from fury to concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, gently examining her wrist where Vernon's fingers had left red marks. "I'm fine," she assured him, still hardly believing he was really there. "Jack, you're back early." He nodded, taking her hands in his. "I couldn't wait 3 months. I left the herd with my second in command and rode ahead." His eyes searched her face. "When I got to town and heard what happened with your job, your room, I was afraid I'd be too late." Tessa felt tears of relief spill down her cheeks. "You came back for me." "I'll always come back for you," he promised, drawing her into his embrace. "If you'll still have me." "Yes," she whispered against his chest. 1,000 times, yes. They were married the next day by Reverend Wilson, with Mrs. Peterson and the sheriff as witnesses. Jack had indeed saved his wages, enough to put a down payment on a small cattle ranch 50 miles north, near a growing settlement called Pine Valley. Before they left Rivercross, Jack had one last conversation with Vernon's brother, who had taken over the saloon after Vernon was sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison for assault and attempted murder. "You'll never set foot in this town again," Jack told him calmly. "If I ever hear you've caused trouble for my wife or any other woman, prison will seem like paradise compared to what I'll do." Mr. Miller, cowed by his brother's downfall and the town's changing attitude, merely nodded. Tessa said her goodbyes to the few friends she'd made, particularly Mrs. Peterson, who pressed a wedding gift into her hands, a fine blue shawl she'd been working on in secret. "For cold nights in your new home," the dressmaker said with a wink. Their journey to Pine Valley took 3 days. Jack had purchased a small wagon for their belongings and Tessa's comfort, though she often preferred to ride beside him on Rusty, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed against his broad back. The land Jack had purchased was beautiful 20 acres of good grazing land with a stream running through it, a small but sturdy cabin, and views of distant mountains. Previous owners had planted an apple orchard that was just beginning to bear fruit. "It needs work," Jack admitted as they stood hand in hand, surveying their new property. "But it's ours." Tessa squeezed his hand. "It's perfect." That night, after they'd brought their few possessions into the cabin and Jack had built a fire in the stone hearth, they sat together on the porch, watching stars appear one by one in the vast Arizona sky. "I never asked," Jack said quietly, "about your eye that first night, or any of it." Tessa rested her head on his shoulder. "You didn't need to. You saw me, really saw me without needing to hear every painful detail." "I saw a brave woman who deserved better," he said, kissing the top of her head. "A woman I fell in love with more each day." "When did you know," she asked, "that you loved me?" Jack smiled. "The moment you started singing that prairie flower song and looked right at me. Your voice reached into my soul and found something I didn't know was missing." He turned to face her. "When did you know?" "When you handed me that wooden rose by the creek," Tessa replied. "No one had ever created something beautiful just for me." Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out another carving. This one a perfect miniature house with a tiny fence and trees. "I worked on this during the cattle drive. It's our future, as I imagined it." Tessa took the carving with trembling hands. "It's wonderful, Jack. I plan to build that fence tomorrow," he said, "and next spring we'll plant those trees." "And fill the house with love," Tessa added softly. Jack drew her close. "That part we've already begun." 1 year later, Tessa stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Jack work with the 3 ranch hands they'd hired as their operation grew. Their small herd had doubled, the apple orchard had produced a bountiful crop, and the vegetable garden Tessa had planted thrived in the Arizona sunshine. The sound of a baby's cry drew her attention back inside, where their 2-month-old daughter lay in her cradle. Margaret Rose Anderson, named for both their mothers, had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Jack came in for the midday meal, washing up at the basin before gently lifting his daughter into his arms. "How are my girls today?" he asked, pressing a kiss to Tessa's forehead. "We're perfect," Tessa replied, leaning into his embrace. As she moved to set the table, the wooden rose and miniature house sat side by side on the mantel, testaments to promises made and kept. Outside, the fence Jack had built surrounded their property, and young trees were beginning to grow tall. That night, after Margaret was asleep and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse Jack had built the previous winter, Tessa sang the prairie flower song softly as she and Jack sat on their porch, his arm around her shoulders. "I was thinking," Jack said when she finished, "about building an addition to the house, a music room with a proper piano. The settlement's growing, and children need music lessons." Tessa's eyes brightened. "Really? You'd do that?" "I told you once that no one would ever hurt you again," he said seriously. "But I also meant to promise that I'd do everything in my power to make you happy every day of our lives." "I am happy, Jack," she said, reaching up to touch his face, happier than I ever dreamed possible. He captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Do you remember what I told you that first night when I saw your eye? That if I needed help, you'd be around," Tessa recalled. Jack nodded. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. Whatever life brings, we face it together." In the distance, coyotes called to one another under the silver moon, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage across their land. Tessa Turner Anderson, once a frightened saloon singer hiding her bruises, now stood tall as a wife, mother, and partner in all things. The black eye had long since healed, but she would never forget the cowboy who had taken her hand that night and never asked who did it, the man who had seen her worth when she had almost forgotten it herself, who had given her not just safety, but a love deeper and truer than any song she could sing. As if reading her thoughts, Jack drew her closer. "I love you, Tessa Anderson." "And I love you, Jack Anderson," she whispered back, "now and always."